So the first issue will be the issue of women working. Second will be the issue of women at home. Third would be the issue of women studying in co-education, or to what extent they may study. A fourth issue would be the hadith, in which says that women are, quote, naqisul aql. I've lost track of the number. The next would be the hadith that the majority of hellfire is women. Next is the question of divorce. That why do women only have a right to divorce? Or what does a woman do in the case of domestic violence? Or even if there's no violence, but in an unhappy marriage, how much sabr, how much patience must a woman do if she's not been given the right of divorce? Question of child custody. When is custody of the children given to the mother, or when to the father, or what if the father is abusive? Questions on marriage. That why can a man marry 4 women but a woman can't marry 4 men? Second, why may a man marry Ahl Kitab but not vice versa? Or is there a concept of marital rape? Next is but these are not all questions that I received. This is my full list. For example, the next one is a question that nobody have asked me yet today. Female slaves and concubines. I'm going to do that. That's the absolutely most difficult question from my perspective on the entire gender Islam issue. The quote-unquote wife-beating verse, and then the question that what if a man misbehaves, if there's gender equality, what about the husband beating? Subhanallah. वो होता भी है, ये नहीं समझे कि होता नहीं है, बिल्कुल होता है. Islamic inheritance law, Islamic testimony law, honor killing, abortion, acid attacks, human trafficking, harassment, pornography, and a argument for pornography. And that this was the question I received today. That it reduces quote-unquote rage in society. I will answer that. An argument that Islamic, what I didn't get today, a rational argument that Islamic gender segregation, if properly observed, leads to quote-unquote frustration in society. So either way, some people view that extreme as causing rage and frustration, and some view this as, right? How to marry, when to marry, early marriage, child marriage, hijab, abaya, niqab. All right, so you can see it's a very, so if you will, that's the full menu, and we have the specials of the day. All right? So I will only be able to do the specials of the day because the full menu is too much to do in 2 hours. Very quickly, I want to show you a couple of things first on this presentation since I have it. And there were a couple of things I related to the earlier morning, and then I'm going to actually go into some of the more difficult ones over here. And this actually will incorporate all the questions I've received from the women so far. So there won't really be any question and answer session. I'm just going to be discussing these topics up till 4:30, inshallah. First, the issue of women scholars, right? So I had mentioned to you from the Sahaba, Ummul Mu'mineen Sayyida Aisha radiyallahu anha. So sometimes people point her out as an exception. So those who are trying to follow online or downstairs, I will be calling this the old presentation. And this is old presentation slide number 2, titled Women Scholars in Islamic History. So an example from the Tabi'in. I just deleted. I've already given an example from Sahaba. I'm just giving you one example. Again, the proof of possibility is achieved by the proof of existence. All right? Darda, the younger one, because there was another woman known by Darda who was elder in age. Darda was held by Iyas ibn Muawiyah rahimahullah ta'ala, an important muhaddith. So those of you know muhaddith, hadith scholar, traditionist of his time, and a faqih and qazi, a judge of undisputed ability and merit. He felt about her, Darda, that she was superior to all the muhaddithin, scholars of hadith of her period, included celebrated masters of hadith like Al-Hasan al-Basri and Ibn Sirin. Alright? So it doesn't just establish the reality of female Muslim scholarship, but the high regard that those female Muslim scholars were held in by male Muslim scholars. And this is from the very earliest, the Tabi'in is the very earliest period after the time of the Sahaba, the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. In fact, if you look at the Common Era date, which is 700 AD, I would challenge anyone to establish in any field in the history of the Western intellectual civilization that in 700 there is a woman scholar in any field in the West who was held in equal or greater regard than the male scholars of her time in any single field. The second thing I would ask you to think about is look at the revolution that Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam brought about within the span of one generation, because all, even non-Muslim historians of pre-Islamic Arabian society will tell you that there was no question or concept of female scholarship. And then within this transformative event for humanity, known as the advent of the Nabuwah of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then the spread of Islam in the time of Sahaba Ikram radiallahu ta'ala anhum, you immediately have the birth of an intellectual tradition, intellectual civilization, and intellectual culture in which women not only reach the heights of scholarship, they reach the heights of religious scholarship, and they are extremely highly regarded by the male Muslim scholars. I'm trying to flush out all the conclusions you should draw from this quote. This is another problem that our people have. We don't know the knowledge, and we don't know how to process and analyze that knowledge and extract all the lessons from the knowledge. Another example, and this, if my daughter is listening, is actually the reason why she is named Zainab, because when I was young and I was an undergraduate at University of Chicago, I read this tale about her, and I made niyat at that time in my life to, if I had a daughter, to name her Zainab. Because my name is Kamal Ahmed, full name is Kamaluddin Ahmed. Zainab bint Ahmed, usually known as Bint al-Kamal, acquired a camel load of diplomas. So diplomas are the licenses to teach. They were like the degree equivalent at that time, known as the ijaza. Camel load is an Arabic expression to mean a whole lot. She delivered lectures on the Musnad of Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. This shows her fiqh. The Shama'il of Imam at-Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala. This shows her hadith, and obviously her love for Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Sharaman al-Athar of Imam at-Tahawi, upon which I'm doing my PhD. Alright, so I have a lot of personal relationship with this quote. The last of which that she read with another woman traditionist, who was Ajib ibn Abu Bakr. Now, if you look, I went way forward in history. So this was, if you go back, Darda, 81 Hijri and 700 Common Era. And then if you go here, this is what? About 700 years later. To show you that this continued in the medieval period. So obviously it must have continued in between. Alright, there are many examples of this. I'll give you one more quote in this. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the greatest scholars of hadith, and among other things also scholar of the history of the biographies and lives of hadith narrators, he gave short biographical notices in his work Ad-Durr al-Karimiyah of about 170 prominent women of the 8th century. So just in a single century, 170 prominent women, most of whom were scholars of hadith, but the others may have been scholars of fiqh or tafsir, right? And under many of whom he himself, Ibn Hajar Asqalani himself, studied under those women. Alright? Is that understood? Alright, so then I give you a window into a whole century. So I've given you across centuries in history, and I've zoomed in on one century so you get an idea. Okay? So this is, and there's much more that one can talk about this issue. Alright. I'm sort of a bit unsure what order to do. Well, let me knock off this since I have this. Alright. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم. Alright. الرجال قوامون, men are qawwam, and I'm deliberately leaving that untranslated now. The caretakers, guardians, however you want to translate it. Men are qawwam over women due to two reasons. The first, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will use language that is, strictly speaking, vague, due to some manner in which Allah ta'ala has done fadl, some manner in which Allah ta'ala has given a tafdeel, a preference of some of them over others. This is interesting Arabic. It doesn't say of men over women. Of some over others, or of one over the other. And due to this, and the second reason why men are qawwam, bima anfaqu min amwalihim, that because they spend of the money they earn. So let me do the second part first. because let me do the first part first, and the second part will lead into the issue of women working, because that is one of the things I did want to talk about. All right? Okay. So, what is the meaning of qawwama, and why are men considered to be qawwam? All right. So, qawwam means in a very intense form, qa'im, right? So you can say guardians, established guardians, established caretakers. So who is doing the establishing? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So that means that part of being a man, part of the gender role, is that Allah ta'ala has established the man in a position of caretaking and guardianship over women. This is not meant to be understood in some negative sense of patronizing to women. It's just a role, right? So some women who have maybe been affected by some of the hyper-feminist discourse that we talked about earlier, view this as inherently patronizing. Some will go so far to say, I don't need a man to be qawwam over me. Now, it may be, the practical reality may be that she is very wealthy, or is a surgeon, or is, 200-pound bodybuilder, or in whatever sense she thinks it, she doesn't need a man to be a guardian or caretaker over her. Fine, she may be honestly stating her personal condition, but Allah Ta'ala wishes that you have a guardian and a caretaker, right? So that is Allah Ta'ala's love, if you ask me, for a woman. That is Allah Ta'ala's honor for the entire gender of woman, right? It's almost like, it's not exactly parallel example. If there's somebody says, okay, I'm going to give you a security guard for today. You say, I don't need it, right? But out of their love and honor for you and their wish for you to be even more protected, then it's not a denial of your ability. But what I'm trying to say here, this verse cannot be understood as a denial of a woman's ability to take care of herself. Because in the time of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, many widow sahabas were taking care of themselves, many divorcee sahabiyat were taking care of themselves, many single sahabiyat were taking care of themselves, and this has continued throughout history. So this verse is not a denial of any ability, capacity, intellectual, physical, otherwise in a woman. It's just an honor that Allah Ta'ala has given them, that this is a role of the man. That's it. Alright? Then there's a specific aspect to it, which is the financial aspect. So that will tie into this notion of working. Alright, so understand this. It is fard. Fard means, fardul ayn, means individually obligatory on an individual man to the extent that he is able, and for some, to the fullest extent they're able, if they need to do the full extent to make a living, to earn a lawful living income, halal rizq for themselves and their immediate dependents. Alright? Okay? It is not fard ayn on a woman to do that unless it's a situation of necessity. So if there's a woman who, let's say in some unfortunate situation, she was wrongly divorced and the husband is not offering any financial support and her parents aren't able to financially support her and she has no other benefactor, sponsor, anything, right? Then now, and she has young children who she has to look after. So yes, now it is now incumbent on her, to whatever extent she is now able, within the guidelines that I will mention shortly about working, that now she does have to work, right? And you will actually see in Pakistan today, because this question of work also always comes from a very elitist perspective. In the rural areas, almost all the women work. Almost everyone is a two-income. So this concept of two-income family is not some elite concept that husband and wife are both surgeon. The real two-income family is where the rural poor are, that the husband is a farmer and the woman is also picking vegetables or fruit in the field. Or in the urban setting, that the husband is a rickshaw driver and the wife is a sweeper, masi in the home. This is the real two-income family, right? And that's, again, done out of a necessity. That's done out of a necessity. So anybody who tries to tell you that it's impermissible for women to work just because they're women, before they even address these upper-class elite women who may be working, first they have to figure out what would be the consequence of this Islamic ruling on the masses of this country who are lower class and lower middle class and who can only survive on the basis of two-income generation, right? In fact, it's even worse in many cases, and not in many cases, but not in very few either, a fair number of cases, that the man is a heroin addict, that he's just lying at home doing nothing, and that poor woman is maybe working triple time in multiple homes or working in 2 different fields, right? Unfortunately, this drug epidemic is not just in the elites. This drug epidemic has also unfortunately affected the poorest of which is the most devastating effect. Because not that the elite should be in drugs either, but in some way they can almost afford the drug abuse, right? But the poor person and the poor family cannot even afford the loss of income of the man because of his drug addiction state. So you have to look at social reality on these things, okay? But strictly speaking, it is farda'an on a man. What this really means is that, now let me explain to you in terms of the language of rights. If the husband earns and the wife earns, the wife and the children have a obligatory right on the husband/father that his earning will support them. However, the wife's earning, nobody has any right on that unless it's a situation of necessity. So now if you move to middle class, upper class families, any woman who works in that sense that her additional income is not required to help meet the necessities of the family, that means that her additional income is entirely hers. She can use it on whatever she wants. She can use it for personal expenses. She can give it all to charity. Whereas the man's income, always there is a right of the women and the children on the man's income. All right? Okay. And that's in a sense as well that men are sort of financial caretakers or guardians. Again, that doesn't mean they can abuse that. It doesn't mean they're dictators. It doesn't mean that this empowerment in any way should lead to any type of oppressive or unjust behavior. The testimony. Her testimony I already explained to you, right? I'll just show you the verse. And bring to witness 2 witnesses from among your men. And if there are not 2 men available, then 1 man and 2 women from those whom you accept as witnesses, from those who you feel are reliable and knowledgeable enough to understand the matter being witnessed. Right? So in contract and commercial law, it's not just enough for somebody to sit there and see you signed it. They have to be literate. They have to understand what agreement was signed. So in case of a dispute, they can offer their testimony in a reasonable knowledge way. So that if one of the women errs, then the other can remind her. Right? Now, what does this mean? It's the same reason that the number 2 is there for men. So don't think that this verse is establishing a women can make a mistake and there's no mention of men making a mistake. That's embedded in the number 2, right? It's the same reason you need 2 men. You can't see what I'm doing, but it's the same reason that you need 2 men. Like I told you, that what happens is that the witnesses, like the court procedure would be that if there's a difference in the memory recollection of the 2 witnesses, then the 2 witnesses will be sequestered and they will be asked to consult with one another, right? And remind one another. Now the 2 men can go and do that. A man and a woman could not do that, right? So the 2 men or the 2 women will both be able to do that. And the other thing which I told you, that to protect the women alone from the hostility that comes when testifying against someone, that is why 1 man is added. That is why the court procedure in those financial transactions which are witnessed by 1 man and 2 women is that the 1 man will offer his testimony first. So he breaks the ice. He's the first one to, so to speak against whoever was wrong, right? And then the 2 women will speak. And this is also just a notion of protecting women. Now again, there may be a woman today who says, I don't need that protection. That may be how she feels, but her Rabb feels differently. Okay? All right. So this is not because women are half as smart or twice as dumb. Okay? This is an incorrect reading. To show you this, there are 4 types of cases in Islamic law. 1 in which a woman's testimony is half that of a man's. A second kind in which a woman's testimony is equal to that of a man's. A third kind is one in which only a woman's testimony counts. And a 4th kind is one in which only a man's testimony counts. Women's testimony is half that of a man's is about financial transactions. I've already explained that. However, this I've done for you. Second case where the equal are known as less confrontational situations, which is a loan or a will or a bequest. So for example, if somebody made a wasiyah left a bequest that up to 1/3 of my assets, my estate that I leave behind, I would like to bequeath it, leave it to XYZ charity, person, etc. If a single woman witnesses that, that is sufficient in Islamic law. Right? If a single woman witnesses, a single person, whether man or woman, so there's no gender issue here. Single person is enough. Now, this is important because if supposedly the reason in the first case why you needed a man and two women was because women were not intelligent, not capable, then one woman would not be enough in this situation. All right? And then a third case in which, as an example of only a woman's testimony counts, are issues which are women-specific and only women know, such as menstruation, childbirth, who is, siblings through radha'a, which is known as wet nursing, etc. Okay? All right. The case in which only a man's counts is known as hudud, but that's not a topic I'm going to do for you today, which is known as the hudud ordinances. That is too long of a discussion for me to talk about today, and that is something I actually did once in great detail in Pakistan. All right. So even before we do this, let's now look at this issue of women working. All right. So the first case is that financial need exists. Okay, in that case, the financial need itself underwrites the permission for a woman to work. I'm going to secondly talk about conditions for working. First, I'm talking about permissibility of working. All right? Second, the financial need does not exist. Then the permissibility of a woman working is dependent on a number of things. Number one, yes, there is the permission of that caretaker guardian. That mahram male may be her father or her husband. Number two is that she can maintain her haya. Right? She can maintain and protect and guard her modesty and chastity, which is not partly also being able to physically dress according to Islamic teachings, but also to be able to work in a workplace and environment where in any sense her modesty, chastity is not threatened. Then the other question that comes is that what if a woman doesn't have financial need in any way? She does have the permission and she feels she is able to guard her haya. What should be her niyyah, her intention? Can her intention simply be to utilize her education for the sake of career fulfillment? Technically, it could be, but as I suggested to you earlier, given that there are very key core areas in which the deen needs and wants women to work, so it is better if she works in those areas. But strictly speaking, for example, if she said, I studied accounting and I just love numbers, and I'm able to work in a place where I'm fully respected and they give me my entire leeway and there's no communication. Even let's say she paints the most perfect picture, right? There's no communication with me, anything at all, and I just want to be an accountant. Okay, technically speaking, that's fine. There's another condition, however, which is that can she balance then this work and career with the role, the particular gender role, which I already discussed with you, that Allah Ta'ala has made for her in the home, right? So that is another thing to look at. And that is different. Every family is different, right? If you're living in a joint family and there are other people who are contributing, you may have less of a role, you may have more of a role. Different family members may have different expectations of you. Different families have different personalities. So these are things that are all case specific, right? So I'll give you an example. There's one type of husband who is fine. Let's say his wife is doing something that he feels has merit or value or worth. So he doesn't feel that she has to cook for him or iron his clothes or do these things or keep the house very clean. So if the husband is like that, and if in a sense that he's fine, then the wife obviously has much more free time. But if the wife is living or married to a husband who wants that she herself should cook his food and iron his clothes and sit with his mother-in-law, her mother-in-law, any and every time any auntie visits his mother, then she's going to have to adjust somewhat in that direction. I'm going to talk about that separately in a moment, which is the role at home. So it's case by case, all right? This much I can say, that definitely a woman could not work if it is going to cause a problem in her marriage or a problem in her ability to raise her children properly in tarbiyah. But that's different for different people. What is the threshold? What is the amount of work that could be met? And that is something that has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis between individuals and family. And that may be something that if there is severe disagreement, that a person may need to seek third-party arbitration or help or counseling to do salah. All right? Before I come to the women at home, if a woman is working, one is her manner of dress, which I'm going to be talking about later, about hijab and jilbab. The second is her manner of professional interaction with the men at work, right? So here I will simply tell you that one is the Sharia requirement, and the second is additional precautions. Additional precautions should be taken as and whenever possible, and especially when the additional precautions are required to protect a person from a real danger or fitna. All right? The Sharia requirement is simply that she should never be alone with a man in an office. All right? And she should not talk in any romantic, alluring, attractive tone or language with any man. It should be purely professional and as little as possible. So one benefit is now email, non-verbal, written communication. All right? That said, many women who, let's say, are, like MBA or other professions, they would respond to me and say, this is impossible. I have to meet the client, it's just me and the client, or I have a colleague, many times it's just me and the colleague in the office, or there's so many ways that I will not be able to fulfill these conditions. My job is just to tell you what the conditions are, right? And for example, I'm going to tell you things about hijab and jilbab and niqab. I mean, which women decide to do those things, ultimately that's Allah Ta'ala has given them that freedom, right? Similarly, my job is to simply tell you the rules and regulations pertaining to women working in the workplace. Which women are able to truly follow them, that's their own thing. But what I will tell you is that this is a very grave problem. That because, and now I'll have to shift to the university, because of the university education system, it now has become a norm. Meaning gender interaction beyond the Islamic limits has become a norm, become viewed as normal. In other words, people become desensitized to it. And if they do that for their O-levels and A-levels and university, then they can't think in the lines that I just described when it comes to working. And in fact, they resist such thinking. And they feel such thinking is oppressive because for 4, 6, 8, 10 years of their life, they have been pretty much freely mixing in all of these school and university environments. So by the time they come at this stage where they're university graduate, then they will tell you these things, that I want to utilize my education and I want to have a career for my own personal fulfillment. All right? So actually, norm changing has to be done earlier. And that is also why the co-education part was not left until the workplace. It was done earlier. This is why breaking of gender norms took place earlier. So rebuilding the gender norms will also have to take place earlier. It's very difficult to convince a woman who has been through co-ed education and university and MBA that now after her MBA, KSBL, or IBA, she cannot work in the corporate workplace because her haya will not be protected. All right? And so then I will point you to a general thing that collectively, and this is another aspect of yesterday's discussion of trying to be religious in irreligious times, there's a certain religiosity that you can do individually. But there's another kind of religiosity that requires an environment, a context, a collectivity, right? And most of the workplaces don't have that religious context. Most of the workplaces don't have that religious atmosphere. Most of the workplaces aren't sensitive to these Islamic concerns. So then there's a big challenge, how to be individually religious in a collective surrounding, whether it's workplace or university, or maybe for some of us, joint family system, if some of us, may individually be more religious than the rest of our family is, how to be individually religious in a collective surrounding which is not so religious. This is the challenge. And in some ways, Islam doesn't provide the perfect solution because Islam's prescription was that the individual and the collective were both supposed to be religious, right? So if you break things, Islam can tell you how to do something right. If you break something, Islam may not always be able to guide you how to fix it 100%. You can say, okay, if I'm a woman in a co-ed university, what are the additional precautions I can take? We can tell you all of that, right? But ultimately, that doesn't fix the problem of coeducation, right? We cannot fix that entirely. As an individual, you can try to protect yourself individually, but ultimately, collective problems require collective solutions, all right? So this covers the issue then of working and studying. A woman at home, all right? A woman's role at home. So one woman asked me this question, that is it compulsory for a woman to cook, and is it compulsory for a woman to do housework? So if by compulsory you mean fard in a sharia sense, the answer is no, right? But what is fard upon you is to make your marriage work, right? So if the husband and wife both take this attitude that they're only going to do what's strictly fard upon them, no marriage will work. No marriage will work. If the husband says, strictly I only have to give you, let's say, money for 3 full dresses, right? And I have to give you enough money for 2 rotis and 1 vegetable 2 times a day, because the Prophet was sunnah, he ate twice a day, not 3 times a day. And fard accommodation is, we'll just have a 1-room flat, and all of us will live in the 1 room. And fard, the AC is not fard, and this is, so the wife will say, I'll cook, give me the clothes, I'll iron them, right? Right? So if the wife wants to take this fard-only attitude, she should be ready for the husband to take the fard-only attitude. And if the husband takes the fard-only attitude, he should be ready for his wife to take the fard-only attitude, and both of them should be ready then for divorce proceedings. All right? So this is foolish. It's not like this is actually wrong. I don't know if I can go so far to say it's haram, but like I told you, it's fard to make your marriage work, right? And many times in human relations, that requires a person to do non-fard things. So you have to see, what is your husband like? So if he's the type of person who likes it that you cook for him, you have to cook for him. Fine, maybe there may be some times when you may not be able to do so. That's reasonable. Maybe the children are giving you a tough time, you had visitors, etc. But overall, that's what you have to do, right? And it's a very big mistake if you sit there and keep listening to your other friend whose husband doesn't require him to cook for. This is another big problem. You are not at all in any way supposed to comparatively assess your situation with the situation of other men or women, other husbands and wives. All you have to do is analyze your spousal relationship and what you can do and your husband can do to make it better as possible. Otherwise, if you start doing that, then you will be or the woman will tell the husband, so-and-so got this car, so-and-so moved us to KDA, they moved to KDA, we're still stuck in wherever, right? La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. It won't work, right? And then what happens is you put undue pressure on yourself and undue pressure on others. So here, I answered the question that strictly speaking it is not compulsory, but it's almost always the wise and sensible thing to do whatever amount of quote-unquote housework. Yes, this is also sunnah that the Prophet ﷺ shared in the housework. But remember how simple the house was of Rasulullah ﷺ. I think one of you once told me this story, right? And I think I remember, right? Huh? So the Prophet ﷺ household was very simple. He didn't have whatever, you guys don't use canals, you use square feet or square yards, but thousands of square feet, right? It was a very simple room. So if you want to have such simple living, then yes, the man can very easily wash a couple of dishes, right? How much housework do you think Sayyidina Rasulullah in absolute terms he really did? But yes, it is a sunnah that to contribute, right? To contribute to the household work, all right? And generally, I would suggest now to all genders, you really, simple living will make, generally speaking, will make your life much easier in many, many ways, all right? In many, many ways. Okay. A random question somebody asked it, is there less barakah in women's earning? No, there's no concept like that. As long as the earning is halal and tayyib, there's no intrinsically less barakah in it due to some gender issue. All right. Okay, so that was one topic of women working, studying, and women's role and responsibility in the home. I would just like to stress again, because that was about being a spouse, being a mother is a very tremendous role. And I definitely think that a lot of women in the West, who for them the norm has become to, just go on maternity leave for a few months and then have a nanny or send your children to childcare, even at the baby infancy level, I don't think any career is so important that you neglect your children to that extent. And unfortunately, that Western model has become the global norm, and this is also something that we have to be very wary and watchful against having that enter into Muslim culture, Muslim families. All right. The hadith that women are naqis al-aql. So this is hadith of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam. But first of all, you must understand its context, and then you must also understand its meaning. It is not in any way an absolute statement in the way some people seem to think, or it has been suggested. All right? Let me open up so this is not on the slide, but I can sort of, so those are some questions raised on Quran al-Kareem, like I did testimony, and the verse on Ar-Rijalu Qawwamuna 'ala Nisa. This is now an example of questions raised on hadith. Walid Basti, are you there? Huh? Questions raised on hadith. All right? Okay. So the word actually first used, the complete wording is naqisat aql wad-din. So strictly, it's even more, at first glance, worrisome for those who don't understand the context, that they are deficient in intellect and religion, right? So this is, the Prophet ﷺ was saying this, number one, in a context of that hadith, which I will tell you. And number two, any and every hadith must be understood in light of the entire Quran and the entire Sunnah and the lived life of the Prophet ﷺ and the lived life of the Sahaba, the first Muslim community. All right? So I've already, just as an example of Sayyidina Aisha, but then there are others as well. There's no question that there were naqisat in their aql and their deen, and the things the Prophet ﷺ has said, for example, about Sayyidah Fatima radhiyallahu, who's also in terms of gender a woman, no one in the world can sense that she was naqis in deen. All right? So what was the context? Sayyidina Rasulullah ﷺ said this sentence on Yawm al-Eid, on Eid, after Eid Salah. And after Eid Salah, he turned to the men, and that was a time when women were coming, and that's another issue, but I won't be doing that today about women and the whole prayer thing. But women were coming to Eid Salah, but they were not praying in the same rows as men. They were praying few rows, gap, and then behind the men. All right? But the men and women were both there. Sahaba and Sahabiyat were both there in Eid. So after the Eid Salah, Sayyidina Rasulullah he told the men and the women, first he told the men that they should spend in charity for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he turned to the women and told them that they should even increase in their charity because of the days of when they're in menstruation, they're not able to pray and fast. All right? So the notion here, so the naqisat aql wa deen, it's sort of a lexical misunderstanding. What rather the Prophet ﷺ was because of that gender-specific phenomenon of menstruation, the women, so it's not a gap in a sense because it wasn't fard on them, it's not obligatory. But in total, if they want to have gender parity, strictly speaking in their book of deeds, there will be less fast and less prayers written. So he was telling them to increase in their charity for this reason. He was not making a statement about the character of women or the ability of women, about the, whatever, hierarchy of men and women. Right? He was specifically using this particular situation of the, after Eid Salah, to ask women to take the lead in charity. And some have interpreted this, that Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam specifically turned to them because perhaps women have a more charitable nature. And when how can you explain when the women are willing to give charity, then that encourages the men. Because sometimes sincere, noble men hold back on the charity a bit because for the sake of their wife and children. That they go, I want to keep this for my wife and children. And when the women are more emboldened in charity, so then that sort of removes those inhibitions or hesitations on the part of the men. All right? So to give you an example, this is a very good example because people, unfortunately also, always negatively cast the Saudi ulama. So a contemporary living Saudi alim who I think actually may have recently been jailed by MBS, I'm not sure. I think I remember this now. Sheikh Salman al-Auda, was a Saudi scholar. He said in commenting on this hadith that this nuqs in deen is not referring to a nuqs in tadayyun, which means religiosity, right? Because there are many women who exceed many men in religiosity. Rather, by nuqs, so the English way you would explain this is they have a lessened responsibility. A lessened responsibility because in certain days, certain religious obligations are waived from them. And so this is contemporary Saudi Salafi scholarship on this hadith. All right? So the classical commentary and the contemporary commentary should be enough to clear this confusion. All right? So women are not intellectually deficient to men. And if they were, then that would have been something that the hadith scholars would have mentioned that we will not accept. And that's maybe the greatest act of testimony in Islam, is to testify that you heard a hadith from someone and that you should be trusted in that, and that your testimony is accepted, and therefore what you were narrating is taken to indeed be the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and people accept you to narrate it onwards. In the field of hadith, which is much more important than financial testimony, right? One woman equals one man. And there are many women narrators of hadith, and due to that woman narrating that hadith, her narration was accepted. Now, if a woman was viewed by the scholars of hadith, due to this single one hadith taken out of context, that she was naqis in her aql in the Urdu sense, that she is somehow intellectually lacking, they would never have accepted her testimony of hadith, because if you know anything about the early hadith scholars, there were extreme scrutiny and critical analysis was given to whose narrations they would accept. And anybody who was found to actually be intellectually deficient, their hadith narration would not be accepted because they would have likely forgot some words or made some mistakes in some words. So if women were definitively intellectually weak because of this one hadith, then no woman narrator, because it's a gender thing, if it was embedded into their gender, no woman narrator of hadith would ever have been accepted by the scholars of hadith. Okay, this is enough, I think, on this one particular hadith. All right? Okay. Because we have some, like I told you, more difficult things coming. Where did it go? So in some of these I want to give just very, very quick answers to, but there's a much more detail. So divorce itself is something that very few people have studied properly. And unfortunately people get married incorrectly, they also divorce incorrectly. This itself actually should be a very, people need to be educated on exactly what marriage is and how to marry, and exactly what divorce is and how to divorce. But this question, when it comes to gender, is that only men have a right to divorce, right? And that is something that I know it disturbs a lot of women, right? Now I would just tell you this, first of all, that a man is not supposed to divorce his wife without cause, all right? But if a man did that, divorced their wife without cause, that divorce would happen. So you have to make a distinction in what type of acts of human beings have legal consequences that Islam has recognized their legal effect, as opposed to what type of acts Islam wants to happen. So the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, that would be a very long presentation, but the emphasis is on conciliation, right? That the husband should try to make the marriage work, he should try to make the marriage work, there can be a third party who arbitrates. The Prophet ﷺ said that divorce is the most disliked, abghazul mubahat, the most detested of permissible things to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is divorce, right? At the same time, obviously divorce had to exist, because if Allah Ta'ala didn't make divorce legally part of Islamic law, then there would be genuine cases where it is actually better for both parties to peacefully, with mutual respect, part ways and move onward. All right? The question remains, though, generally, not just in the heart of women, but just as a pure academic question, why do women not have the right to initiate that? All right? There's some women who accept this, some women, not all, some women accept this and say that if women had the right to give divorce, then किसी की खैर नहीं होनी थी, समझ गए ना? Right? Then a lot of more divorce would take place. All right? Because even men, when they wrongly issue divorce, is often in a state of anger or a state of frustration. Right? But so this is an example of a gender difference. So there was a book written in the, I think, late 90s called Brain Sex, but it means brain gender. It was a group of psychiatrists and psychologists tried to assess through the brain, neurologically, that there are differences in gender. And they concluded that women are more emotional and creative than men. Modern hyperfeminism strongly rejects this because it negatively interprets this as suggesting that women being more emotional means they're weaker. Being more emotional could mean that you were stronger. So I will give the example of motherhood. A mother is a stronger parent than a father. The reason the mother is a stronger parent than a father is because a woman has the ability to feel stronger emotion than a man. And therefore she is able to feel more compassion for the child than a man. So if that is true, then the same thing would be true in husband and wife. So husband is also capable of anger and mistake, and many divorces, unfortunately, happen because of that. But perhaps in the same way, the woman as a mother is capable of a stronger emotion of love and compassion for the child. Possibly a woman as a wife is capable of a stronger emotion of anger and perhaps would even more rashly issue divorce than the men indeed rashly do. The ultimate answer to this is what I told you on the first day, that we know for a fact, and it is a necessary aqidah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Hakim and ahkam al-Hakimin. He is the perfect being with the perfect wisdom, and He has designed Islam perfectly. We may not we're all naqis aql in that sense. Everyone's rational ability is limited in its ability to identify and understand, and therefore then ultimately agree with the wisdom behind all of Allah Ta'ala's God's commandments. Alright? Okay. We can just offer some speculative answers. Alright? Second was the question of how much sabr should a woman do. So like I told you, there was a system, and Islamic law had that not just in terms of physical abuse, but there's a whole list of cases in which the qadi, the Islamic justice, could annul fasq, that marriage. And in fact, there's even some judicial discretion beyond the list of things. There's also an area of discretion for him. And that was the way that women had recourse and in some sense had a right to divorce. So ultimately then what happens in the Islamic system is that a woman has the right to seek divorce in the form of fasq, annulment of marriage, on due grounds and processed through a qazi. The only thing then that is left that a woman doesn't have the right to do is there's no way the woman can divorce a man for no reason whatsoever. Now if you look on the other side, I told you, a man, although he has that ability, but he is not supposed to do it. So it is not the teaching of Islam that a man should divorce a woman for no reason whatsoever. Alright? Okay. Marriage. I'm not going to do this issue of marriage because I want to do the more difficult one of... well, let me do the more difficult one first because I really want to do that. Just because they're very difficult. So I'm going to talk about this issue of female slaves and concubines. So for me, in my entire journey in study to Islam, this has been personally the most single difficult thing for me to understand and explain to people about the Quran. Because not just in one places, in a few places, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned this, that you may not have ultimate relations with any woman other than those who are in your nikah. Okay, that everybody understands. Those who are in your nikah, or ma malakat aymanuhum. So what literally means those whom your right hands have mastery and ownership of. So this issue brings up, number one, just generally the issue of slavery, and number two, the issue of a man having a right to have that physical relation with a female slave. All right? Okay, so let's start first. And these two are both very, very big topics. So the issue of slavery, all right? Number one, slavery pre-exists Islam, all right? So it was a social reality and a phenomenon. What Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam did do, as he was revealed to by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was not to outright eliminate slavery in one go. The first thing he did was to give rights to the slaves, to legislate proper treatment to the slaves, so much so that it became, within the lifetime of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, very much like a employer-employee relationship. If it was a male slave, he'd be working in your house and your land just like any domestic worker or factory worker or employee was. Okay, there's still the issue of human ownership though, so I'm going to come back to that. But the first thing that Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam did was change the nature of the relationship by giving slaves those rights, and second, legislating the behavior and treatment that the masters have to give to their slaves. The second thing that the Prophet ﷺ, Deen of Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did, was to give massive rewards for the freeing of a slave. In other words, the ending of the human ownership itself. So one is the mistreatment, but there are two problems in slavery. One is that humans are mistreated. That was done taken care of within the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. The second problem is just the notion of a human being owned by another human being. Human ownership of another human being, the very concept of slavery itself. So for that, Islam gave a lot of rewards for freeing slaves. There were some types of kafara, some expiations for sins, mistakes that a person had to free a slave. And the number of slaves drastically went down, such that you can see historically that slavery ultimately finished in the Muslim world. All right? So there was a process. Now, different historians debate how long it took. It is a matter of centuries. It's not a matter of a few years. But ultimately, slavery was eliminated in this manner. And that's far before slavery was eliminated in the West or the United States. That's just a fact. That doesn't mean we judge ourselves. That doesn't mean anything in of itself, right? But it is a historical fact to remember, okay? Right now, there are a few small, remote Muslim communities, such as in Mali and Mauritania in Africa, where there is very small, in the dozens, practices of slavery left. But again, if you were to see that, it's a very happy, it's a happy relationship. It's just sort of their culture and subculture, right? How they have maintained that, okay? Okay, so anyway, that was the slavery issue. That had nothing to do with gender. That was a gender-neutral discussion. This issue, all right? So, okay, let me even do another issue. So, enslaving someone was also made prohibited in Islam, except for one case, which I will talk about. So that was another way the Prophet ﷺ and Deen of Islam began the end of slavery. No additional people could be made into slaves, great rewards in releasing slaves from slavery, and certain actually legal requirements in certain cases to free slaves. Enslavement of women in warfare. So all of you know this group called ISIS adopted this practice, and this is not some conspiracy theory, this is a real fact. That there were women who were part of, it's a remnant of some pagan religion, the Yazidis of the Kurds, and there are elements of their human community still who are following some of these very old pagan traditional rites. So no doubt they were of that community. Now, the first thing I will tell you is that the entire history of the Kurdish Yazidi people, from the very first moment when Islam entered the area up to ISIS, no one ever enslaved them, right? So if this was a position of Islam, There have been other Islamic scholars. ISIS is not the beginning of Islam. There have been thousands of Islamic scholars across the entire centuries in which the Kurdish lands then became majority Muslim. This was not in any way an Islamic teaching that because of their paganism, you have the right to enslave them. All right? In fact, the only effect that paganism would have is that you have a right to do dawah on them because they are stuck in a very old, almost pre-monotheistic form of primitive religion, right? So whether Christianity or Islam, the monotheistic faith would teach them that you have to bring them out of this primitive form of religion through love and through wisdom and through mercy and through dawah and through invitation to deen. All right? So what ISIS did is really nothing other than a rape. And they should, if ever they are arrested, they can easily be happily tried under Islamic law for rape and given the punishment for death. And if any of them happen to be married, that didn't know who the ordinance is for you, they can be stoned to death. I think there the Westerners will join us on this one. Say, well, we'll forget stoning up for these guys. They will be happy to do the punishment of stoning for death because they're guilty of many other crimes beyond just the rape of these innocent Kurdish Yazidi girls. All right? Many other crimes. And again, crimes that are done in the name of Islam, under the guise of Islam, you see what I'm saying? Disguise of Islam have to be condemned extremely openly. That said, in the very early period of especially the Tabi'in and Tabai Tabi'in, there were legal conquests in which women were made slaves. I want to explain to you what happened. All right? So when you had the spread of the Islamic empire, right? And I will tell you openly, this notion that Islam did not spread by the sword, that's not entirely true. This notion that Islam spread only by the sword, that's not entirely true. The truth is pretty much this, that the Islamic empire historically spread by the sword. The Islamic religion did not spread by the sword, right? And some people, what happened is that when the empire spread and the justice and social economic system of Islam was established, they decided to accept Islam. You may also make an argument, because no doubt that must have been the case in history, some people accepted Islam only in order to then become, Muslim citizens of the Islamic empire because they weren't happy being dhimmis, which was another type of citizenry in the Islamic empire. But we would say if somebody does a good thing for the wrong reason initially, as long as after they do the good thing, they realize goodness in it, and they continue in that goodness for the right reason, they'll be fine on the Day of Judgment. So I actually wouldn't view those people as imposter Muslims or fake Muslims or not true Muslims or they became Muslim for political reasons. No, that may have been some part of the way Allah Ta'ala guided them, but ultimately after they would have accepted Islam, I will view them as true, sincere, full-fledged Muslims. All right? In these places I should also tell you, by the way, that what people say is sort of offensive, this is no longer the hukam that Islam needs to spread by the sword. There's no concept that Islam needs to go into South America militarily and establish Islam in South America. You have to understand the historical context. After the Prophet ﷺ passed away, the religion of Islam was existing in an age of empire, not an age of modern nation state, in an age of empire. Whether it's the Roman Byzantine Empire, whether it's the Persian Empire. Later you will have, in the Chinese were also an empire state. So in order for the religion of Islam to be established as a real force on earth, there was a need to establish it territorially, politically, geographically as an empire. All right? And that was the ruling for that time. That is not the ruling for this time. Right? And that was done. And that's a history, right? I mean, whether people personally are happy about it or not, I'm just talking to history, right? This would be a disservice or would be dishonest history to suggest that no, Islam never ever spread anywhere by the sword and there were no battles. There's no way any historian can claim that, okay? All right. So here, during that early spread of the Islamic empire, when obviously, naturally, humanly, many of the non-Muslims resisted and fought who they viewed to be an invading, occupying power, and then when they were defeated,
The question was what to do with the widows, not all the women in the area. What to do with the women's of the wives, if you will, of those soldiers that you defeated in battle and therefore killed them. All right? So the Islamic teaching in that case was that you are now responsible for the kafalat. It starts from this concept. You are responsible as qawam. You were responsible for the guardianship and caretaking and provision and providing for that woman, even though she's not a Muslim, right? She may be whatever. She can be anything, right? And they were then placed in the home in exchange for your providing them, giving them this shelter and their guardianship and their caretaking and their financial support. They will do some, not that thing, they will do some domestic work, some domestic labor for you, the same way that in pre-Islamic times and although gradually fading, domestic slavery, domestic workers used to do. All right? Okay. Then comes this issue of the physical relations. So my reading of this issue is a little bit different than what you may have heard. So there are two possibilities. Always in this type of thing. And the modern language is, we call it consensual or non-consensual. Some people think that these verses in the Quran are absolute, so they are referring to both consensual or non-consensual relations between that male Muslim and that female, most often non-Muslim, who is now living under his care and protection and support and offering work, not that, offering some type of, doing some type of household work, chore, domestic labor, whatever the case may be, in return, in exchange for that. Right? I disagree. I suggest that it is only referring to consensual. Because when you do a close reading of some of those passages, there's a notion that maybe nikah can't take place because the person can't afford the nikah. Maybe the nikah can't take place because he already has 4 wives. That could be another reason, right? But for whatever reason, this man and this woman who is under his care and is also offering some type of legitimate, non-oppressive, fair work in exchange for his care, have developed feelings for one another such that they want to. All right? Because the other option, if you suggest that, no, this is referring to non-consensual, well, it's not just a modern feminist thing. Throughout history, any type of physical relation of that kind that is non-consensual is called rape. All right? It's called rape. And the motive behind that would be 2 things, lust and violence. Because if it's non-consensual, there is some level of force that has to be used. Maybe not brutal force, but some level of forcefully committing the act. So I'm going to call that violence. And why would somebody do the act to begin with? That is lust. So then I look at every other thing in the religion of Islam. And I see everywhere that Islam is telling a man, destroy your, kill lust and kill violence. So how can it be that a religion that in every other sense tells a man not to be a creature or a slave to your lust, or a creature or a slave that is prone to violence, in this one case gives him absolutely free rein to absolutely, willfully, unrestrictedly pursue lust and violence? Doesn't make sense to me. And then my understanding of who those Sahaba, Tabi'in and Tabai Tabi'in were, these muttaqeen, salihin, dhakireen men, these men who had done so much mujahada on their nafs, had eliminated all these attributes of untamed lust and forceful violence, right? These pure, pristine men who were spiritual lovers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and lovers of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. For me to imagine that they could commit an act which is basically requires this untamed lust willful violence, I can't make that leap. And because I feel that my interpretation, while certainly not being certain, is possible. So for me, I will take a possible interpretation rather than have this type of view about those beautiful human beings that they could commit that type of act based on lust and violence. All right? And my understanding also is that if these wonderful, beautiful men, human beings, had actually treated that woman according to all their morals and ethics and virtues of Islam and been such a kind and loving caretaker and guardian to her, I can expect that 99% of those women would have fallen in love with that man. But that's me. That's my reading of history. All right? So that is my answer to this question. That said, there is nothing definitively in the language. I'll give you another way. So this is the issue of marital rape. So when Allah Ta'ala is saying in the Quran that you may do that with those women who are in nikah with you. So nikah is an expression of consent. The nikah itself is a consent. That's why there's no concept of marital rape in Islam. Because the concept of marriage is that when you agree to nikah, you are agreeing for as long as that nikah remains valid, right? That you are willing, both parties are agreeing, that as long as that nikah remains valid, it doesn't end in a talaq or in different ways, that you are willing to do that act. And no doubt there are some laws that you cannot do that act in menstruation. There may be a person who is ill or sick, right? But otherwise, basically, it's a consent. So when Allah Ta'ala says you may do that act with those women who were in your nikah, means you can do that act with those women who have consented to that act through nikah, wa ma malakat imanuhum, and to those women whom your right hands possess who consent otherwise outside nikah. That's my reading of that verse. I tell you openly and honestly, this is not the prevalent reading of the verse, right? But this is my reading, and I told you why. Because if I take the other reading, then these men who I view very highly would have actually committed an act of lust and violence. And you have to be honest, there's no way you can say that that's not lust and violence because Islam said, because it's okay, because it was jaiz. It's still an emotion, right? I mean, like inside nikah, it's still an act of lust. It's fine, that's permissible, but it's still lust, right? So this is my reading of this issue, all right? And this is the way I handle what I view to be the most difficult thing, and I think this is the first time I've actually publicly explained it. Because it's very hard to openly talk about such things, all right? Because this is an awkward topic. But because it is, and the reason I bring this up actually, and the real reason I'm talking about this for the first time publicly is not because of today's topic, it's because of day one topic. Because this is one of the things the atheists bring up, right? And so for all these years I may have not talked about this so openly because I always viewed it as falling under gender. And I would always have it on my list, but I would never talk about it when I would do the gender and Islam presentation. But actually this is now in the atheism topic in the sense that the atheists use this a lot. These verses in Quran and this whatever thing a lot to try to take Muslims away from Iman. And again, if you remember, I told you that the same way that we are willing to expand our Islamic legal interpretation to go beyond just one school of fiqh for the sake of Islamic banking and finance, then I think we have to be able to expand the Islamic interpretation in order to defend against the atheist onslaught which is trying to steal the Iman of children. And therefore I think in order to counter atheism, not just as a pure act of academic tafsir, that we have to be willing to consider this possible interpretation. All right? Okay. The rest is relatively, fairly, the rest of the things we've talked about already a little bit. I suppose I can do some of them for you. Okay, so the wife beating verse, let's say that's the same, because that's also, I'm not the atheist more, all right? This is that enemies of Islam and people who want to take Muslims away from their iman in Islam bring this up, right? And this will be the last thing I do, because I do want to talk a bit about hijab and jilbab, because actually the core teaching of gender is haya, right? So in every sort of bab, as we say in every bab of ilm, there's an asl. In every chapter or area or discipline of learning, there is a core fundamental principle. And the core fundamental principle when it comes to gender is haya, right? So I want to talk a little bit about that. So last thing I'll do is this. Unfortunately, I did not put this verse up for you. Let me just open it up for me. This may be, this is very long. This may be a bit longer than I can do. This is Surah An-Nisa, Surah 4, verse number 34. The detailed explanation I give this is one of the things I do in the Standard Gender Workshop, and that is a very long, detailed explanation. I will just fast forward and tell you the hardest part. So this word, وَضْرِبُوهُنَّ. This does not come, this is not the first, it's not the first step. Basically, the way this has been understood, I'm just going to give you the very short answer. The short answer to this is that this has been understood to be a very light slap, which leaves no mark. The jurists have actually written this, that leaves no mark, does not inflict serious pain. It is something equivalent to what in English people talk about, I'm going to slap you into your senses, all right? So the physical act that is being referred to here is nothing more than a single slap, if you will. All right? Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in his own commentary on this verse, gave the example of taking a miswak. So a miswak pretty much has the mass of a pen, right? So if you hit somebody with a pen, how much pain could that cause? In other words, it's a symbolic act, right? When you slap someone into their senses, it's a symbolic thing. It's not that you apply such brute force that somehow they come into their senses. So the act being meant here is a symbolic act. Second, it is not prescribing that you necessarily have to do that. So you will see in different cultures, sometimes people reprimand their children through a kind of slap which is known as spanking. Certainly in British schools, for a long time, there was caning even in British schools, that you would bend over and right? And what is that? Now, some people today may also say that even that was child abuse. But if that was done very lightly, for many centuries in many cultures, this was viewed as definitely not the first step. At the very last step, should not be done in anger. So the Islamic thing is also, if you do it out of anger, you shouldn't do it. You're actually supposed to do it only. That's another teaching, by the way. Just think like Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when he was fighting, and the enemy, he spit in his face, so he didn't strike the blow. That's a big thing, because if you don't strike the blow, that person will live, and that person may go kill another Sahaba. You're letting a warrior live, and he's going to get right back up and fight someone else, right? But he didn't, because he knew it's out of anger, right? And that was a hukam. It was fard at that time, in a sense, to strike him down. But he didn't, because the anger corrupted intention. This isn't fard or wajib or sunnah or anything. It's just a possible, permissible thing that you may do, one light, reprimanding physical act, which the jurists have strictly regulated. So much so that a person gets punished if there's anything beyond a light reprimanding act. There's a shari punishment in the books of medieval fiqh, right? But the other thing is that you cannot do that in a state of anger. So what that means is pretty much most people will never really be able to practice this verse properly. And that is also that pretty much most people cannot treat 4 wives equally. Then people ask this question, why put verses in the Quran that most people aren't going to be able to practice? Is that not something that will lend itself to abuse? And that's correct also. So you need a lot of training and education to make sure people don't misinterpret, misunderstand, misapply verses of Quran. The reason it is mentioned here in Quran al-Kareem is it is referring to a very specific situation, all right? Because it is actually the very same, but I didn't put the whole Arabic, it's the very same verse of Ar-Rijalu Qawwamuna 'ala Nisa, all right? The very same verse, Surah Nisa, Surah 4,
verse number 34. Okay. If there's a woman, wallati, and that woman, takhafuna nushuzahunna, that you are afraid that she has committed nushuz. Nushuz, in its extreme sense, means adultery. Alright? Which in any case, the punishment, if there were 4 male witnesses, would have been stoning to death. Again, this is another teaching, as you know, 99.99% of the time, that's also not going to happen practically. So there are no 4 male witnesses. Right? So, okay, now what should the husband do? So that verse is not talking about husband being angry or marital spat. This one single light reprimanding slap is being mentioned not in any and every marital dispute. It's being mentioned specifically regarding what should the husband do if he fears that the woman has been guilty of infidelity. And infidelity means adultery. Alright? This is a very specific situation. A very specific situation. Right? So if in that sense a woman asks that if the woman fears that the man has done infidelity or adultery, should she slap him? So I will say you can answer that question yourself based on the rest of the ayah. Okay, so those women whom you fear that they have committed an act of infidelity or adultery. So you may have, okay, what should you do? First, you were supposed to فَعِذُوهُنَّ wa'adh, it's from wa'adh. You should verbally reprimand them, counsel them verbally. Verbally. Okay, you can call it verbal reprimand, you can call it verbal counsel, verbal admonishment. There are different ways you can use in English. Step 1. Step 2, if that doesn't resolve the matter between you, right? Or that doesn't rectify their behavior of infidelity, then step number 2, wahjuruhunna, means you should refuse to share their beds, right? That is again a psychological act, right? You should disassociate from intimacy. You should disassociate from any act of affection. You should boycott them in that sense, all right? Second step, all right. Third step, and this is in tartib, so it's sort of and last resort. If that doesn't work, you will administer a light, non-traumatic, non-brute force, non-severe pain inflicting light physical reprimand in the form like how sometimes parents spank a child, that type of thing. All right? Okay. And if that doesn't work, first, if that works, any of these 3 works, if any of these 3 works, let me go back. فَإِنْ أَعْتَعْنَكُمْ, and if they then obey you, they come back to compliance and leave that infidelity and disloyalty, okay, then فَلَا تَبْغُ عَلَيْهِنَّ سَبِيلًا, then do not seek any other means of recourse against them. So don't go to the next step, don't repeat any step that you've done, do nothing against them. Why? إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيًّا كَبِيرًا, because Allah Ta'ala is Ali and Kabir, He's all high and exalted, and He's Kabir, He's the greatest. Alright? However, if that doesn't happen, then what is the 4th step? فَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ شِقَاقٍ, if you fear that now there will be a split, okay, بَيْنَهِمَا, between the 2 of them, between the husband and the wife, then you should appoint 2 arbiters, one from his family and the others from her family. Then Allah Ta'ala says that if they wish, in yurida islaha, if the 2 of them have irada of sulah, if the 2 of them wish to reconcile, watch this, yuwaffiqullahu bainahuma, Allah Ta'ala will join them again. So if they want it, it will happen. Allah Ta'ala is saying, if they want it and you follow this procedure, it will happen. Inna Allaha kana aliman khabira. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all-knowing and all-aware. Alright? So what does it mean? All of these steps are being taken in order to avoid a divorce.
this ayah also shows how disliked divorce is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That He would rather have, even if the wife committed infidelity and adultery, that they should still live together as husband and wife. If that can be, as long as her behavior is rectified. If her behavior is rectified through verbal reprimand, through separating the beds, or through a single light reprimand, or through third-party arbitration, and as long as the two of them in their hearts, they genuinely want to be patched up, Allah Ta'ala Himself will patch them up. And this is important because, as you know, this type of breach cannot be patched up. The breach of infidelity and adultery. Only Allah Ta'ala can patch it up. So in other words, it's done not out of anger, not out of punishment. All the steps are done for the sake of patching up. And if that's not a person's intention, and if he's intending to divorce her no matter what, then he can't do this. Cannot actually even administer one light slap unless he's doing it as part of this process. And his intention is to patch up, and his intention is to rectify the behavior in order to patch up and take her back. But if it's not his decision and it's not what he has planned, then he cannot adopt this process. Okay, so this explains the verse. Question, could a woman do all this? No. All right, isn't that unfair to the gender? So again, first answer is Allah Ta'ala is the perfect being with perfect wisdom. Second answer, I would suggest to you, with all the listeners, that if a man is found guilty of infidelity and adultery, and the woman, no doubt he's worthy of more than a slap. Islam says he's worthy of being stoned to death, okay? So there's no question there, is he deserving of a slap or not? Islam says he's worthy to be stoned to death, okay? But what I'm suggesting to you is the woman's slap is unlikely to rectify his behavior because men are more stubborn, men are less likely to change, men are less able to change, and rather than the slap helping him to rectify his behavior and helping them patch up, the slap will actually make him more angry and hasten the process of the separation. Therefore, the purpose of the slap will not be accomplished. Therefore, the slap is not granted. That's it. So this is my interpretation and analysis of this verse. All right? But either way, the important thing is that this is not in any way to be referred as the quote-unquote wife-beating verse. This is not allowing domestic abuse and battery. Even in that incident, it is allowing a single act, which is light, only if the purpose of that act is to patch up. Okay, not everybody is like that. If the man knows this about his wife in any case, that it's not going to work, he can't do it. He can't do it then. He can only do it for this reason, and if he thinks it's going to work, right? That's the only way this is allowed. All right? Okay, so this was another big one. Now I want to do for you, finally, the issue of hijab and jilbab at least. I don't think I'll be able to reach niqab. Hijab and jilbab. Okay. So the verses in Quran Kareem about hijab, Surah An-Nur, Surah 24, verse 31. I'm going to make a claim to you right now before I do it. I'm going to show you, inshallah, with the fazl of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that absolutely beyond any doubt whatsoever, irrefutably, definitively, that it is required for a woman to wear a hijab, khimar, head covering that covers all of her hair, and to wear a jilbab, abaya, some form of loose outer garment, cloak, in addition to her standard upper and lower garment. And from Quran, and from 2 verses of Quran, and in a way that if Javed Ghamdi would never be able to, in a way that will pierce all of his arguments on these 2 things. All right? Okay, so I wanted to make that claim first so that you are ready for that. All right. So let's do this first, and if you can see the Arabic. وَقُلَ الْمُؤْمِنَاتِ يَغْضُضْنَ مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِنَّ وَيَحْفَظْنَ فُرُوجَهُنَّ وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنَّ. And proclaim, beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to all the believing women, not just the Ummahatul Mu'mineen, to all the believing mu'minat, that they must lower their gazes. Number 2, they must guard their chastity and honor. And number 3, that they should not reveal their zinat. They should not reveal their beauty. Okay? Illa, alright? Ma dhahara minha. They should not reveal their beauty except that which is apparent. So I'll come back to this in a moment. What is this that's being accepted? Illa ma dhahara minha. Except that which is dhahir. Let's just leave it in Arabic for now. Except that minha, that from their beauty that is apparent. That part of their beauty that is apparent. Okay? Alright. So they should not reveal any single aspect of their beauty except that particular part of their beauty that is already outwardly apparent. That's how I'm going to translate it for you. Alright? Okay, next. وَلْيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ عَلَى جُيُوبِهِنَّ. And they should drape their head coverings. Khumr means head coverings. They should drape their head coverings, drape and draw their head coverings over their breast, chest. Alright? So if I had a rumal, I would actually practically physically demonstrate this for you. You take it like this and you drape it over, like the men do with the shawl, right? This is what is being mentioned. Okay. And let me pause here and show you some things about this. So this word, specifically this word, khumr. Khumr is a plural form of the singular word khimar. Khimar, okay? The English translation for the word khimar would be head covering. I will prove this to you now. The word khimar, plural khumr. So Az-Zabidi has so there's these Arabic lexicons, right? They will be the definitive from the classical period about what is the meaning of any particular Arabic word. So Taj al-Urus, written by Zabidi, or Al-Misbah by Fayumi, or the Al-Qamus of Fairuzabadi, all of them describe khumr as a head covering, so much so that the Taj al-Urus mentioned that even a man's turban is referred to sometimes as a khimar because it covers the man's head. So lexically speaking, linguistically speaking, the Arabic word khimar means head covering. But what they're being taught is the head covering shouldn't just be a bandana type scarf. It should be a long enough piece of cloth that in addition to drawing it over the head such that it covers the head, it should also drape over the chest. That's the Arabic meaning of this verse. There's no room for interpretation in the Arabic. This argument that the word hijab is not in Quran, but the word hijab, by the way, is in the Quran, but not on this meaning. Hijab is not the only word in Arabic which means head covering. Alright? And although in the South Asian world people use hijab, but in Jordan, Syria, they still use the word khimar for what me and you call hijab. Alright? So the Arabic word for head covering is in Quran, and the Arabic word for head covering, its singular is khimar, and its plural is khumr. So you will tell them that they should take their head covering and also drape it and draw it over their breast. Understood? All right. There's no other way, lexically, linguistically, legitimately, in any sense of the Arabic lexicon, that khimar can be understood other than head covering. All right? Okay. All right. And then, then is the long list of the relatives, except they can They should not reveal their zinat except to their husbands, their fathers, their husbands' fathers, their sons, or their husbands' sons from a prior or other marriage, or their brothers, or their brother's sons, or sister's sons, or women, their women, or their slaves or male attendants who lack vigor, or children who are so young that they don't know or understand things. All right? Okay, and let them not stamp their feet so as to reveal what they hide of their adornment, which means if they're wearing some type of ankle bracelets or something, and turn to Allah Ta'ala together, O believers and all, in order that you may succeed. All right? وَتُوبُوا إِلَى اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا أَيُّهَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. All right. Now, the first thing, so the next thing you should hear is whatever, let me show this back to you in Arabic. Okay, and then again it came. You can see it's right on top of each other, right? The way we formatted it. You see that? وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتُهُنَّ. And do not reveal your zinat except to those categories. So now, anyone, any person who looks at this verse must define zinat as something that you cannot display to others, but you may display that to your father and your uncle and your son. Right? This is also, Javed Ghamdi has no answer for this. So linguistically guaranteed in the verse, khumr means head covering, that you drape it over your chest. And secondly, that there is a zinat that you cannot show to the other, but you may show to your uncle. All right? So what is that zinat? Okay? All right. So this is the notion of khimar. So you should know it is absolutely fard. Absolutely fard in any and all situations where a woman is in front of any man other than the list here. Absolutely, irrevocably, universally fard for a woman to cover her entire head and drape an extra cloth. So everyone has an upper garment and a lower garment of their own clothing. An extra, that khimar should be long enough, it is extra cloth that it covers the chest. Absolutely fard. Absolutely fard. This is the basic 101 of Haya. Alright? And you know how absent this is in our society. Alhamdulillah, there are many women who do it, but at the same time there are many women who don't do it. But the problem today is not discussion, is not individual practice, but the problem is the understanding. There are too many people who do not know that this is fard in Islam. Okay, jilbab. This is Surah Al-Ahzab, Surah 33, verse 59. Ya ayyuhan nabiyyu, qul li azwajika wa banatika wa nisa'il mu'minin. Because is another deception that some of these speakers on TV say, that this was only for the ummahat al-mu'minin, only for the azwaj mutahharat. So what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying in Quran? O beloved messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, qul, proclaim, yes, to your azwaj, to the ummahat al-mu'minin, to your noble wives, wa banatika, and to your daughters, and also to who? Nisa il-mu'minin, all the women of the believers. This is a rare construct, by the way. Mostly Allah Ta'ala in Quran says mu'minat. Nisa il-mu'minin, it's an ishara. They're the women of the male believers. It means it's also partly the man's responsibility to make sure the woman does these things. Not just mu'minat here, nisa al-mu'minin. Okay. Yudnina alayhinna min jalabibihinna. Jalabib is plural of jilbab. Jalabib is plural of jilbab. Yudnina alayhinna means that they should draw around them. Their jalabib means jilbab. It's an outer garment. You can call it cloak, you can call it coat, you can call it abaya, you can call it jilbab. It's another article of clothing. This is not done by wearing loose shalwar kameez. This is another mustaqil
article of clothing, another accessory, an additional outer garment that goes in addition to whatever upper and lower garment a person is wearing, whether that may be a Western dress or Pakistani dress or so many different types of dress. Another piece of clothing. All right? ذَلِكَ أَدْنَى أَن يُعْرَفْنَا فَلَا يُؤْذَيْنَ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا. That will be better for them so that they may be recognized and not annoyed. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all forgiving, all merciful. Alright? Okay. Now, similarly, the same thing I mentioned to you about khimar is the same thing that is true about jilbab. There's no other possible Arabic translation, no other possible Arabic meaning of this word. Now let me show you from a hadith. Sayyidina, in the Sunan of Abu Dawud, Salma, who was from the Ummahat al-Mu'mineen, anha, she narrates that when this verse was revealed, the women of the Ansar then came out wearing jalabib. The women of the Ansar came out having changed their dress and wearing jalabib, or wearing these extra outer garments known as jilbab. Then, when it came to the issue of women going to Eid Salah, so this is a hadith on the Sahih Imam Bukhari narrated by Atiyah radiallahu ta'ala anha, that once a woman, she asked Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam about the woman coming to Eid, and she asked, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, what about the woman who does not have a jilbab? Can she come for Eid Salah? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said she must borrow the jilbab of her companion. So at that pure time, if people forget this part, people just talk about the women being able to come for Eid Salah. At that pure time, with the pure men Sahaba, pure female Sahabiyat, being allowed to come for active worship, a pure act of worship, which is Salatul Eid. And there was a woman who apparently, I can't remember the exact commentary, but apparently maybe was too poor to have a jilbab, did not have a jilbab. Could she come? Can an exception be made for a female Sahabiya, one of the most pious women in the history? Can an exception be made for a little period just to come for Eid Salah and go back? Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, no exception can be made. She wants to come, she must borrow the jilbab of a companion. Allah, Sahih Bukhari. Allahu Akbar Kabira. Lisan al-Arab is another famous Arabic lexicon defining jilbab, plural, jalabib. An outer garment or a cloak with which a woman covers, a long outer garment or a cloak that covers a woman completely. Completely. Alright? Okay? Obviously then that garment will be wide and loose and modest, etc. So khimar and jilbab is clearly there. A little bit I will do on niqab. Right? Allahu Akbar. A little bit I will do on niqab. So what will I do about niqab? I will go back here. Right? So there are two interpretations of this verse. Remember I told you the ma dhahara minha. Okay? Interpretation one, that they must conceal their beauty except that which is apparent. Interpretation one, that which is apparent is the face, the hands, and the feet. So then, because there's no room for interpretation on the khimar and jilbab, so a woman who follows that interpretation will wear the head covering that is loose enough that it covers her chest, and also be wearing a cloak, outer garment, abaya, and jilbab, but she will allow to be displayed her face, her hands, and her feet. That's interpretation number one. Interpretation number two, that illa ma dhahara, that she must conceal her beauty except illa ma dhahara minha, except that which is apparent, which is the zahir, refers to her extremities, yani her hands and feet. So the dhahara in this means
the outward use of hands and feet in daily work. And face is part of the beauty that has to be concealed. Okay? There are a few also, so let's just run with these two. So what's the difference in the two? Face. All right? Okay. So now let's look at this word. You have to cover your zinat. All right? Okay. So it's all about the beauty of a woman. So let's step back and ask our other human beings, the West, where does the beauty of a woman lie? Let's ask Vogue magazine. Let's ask Cosmopolitan magazine. Let's ask every modeling agency and casting agency in the world. Let's ask every cosmetics industry in the world. They will tell you the beauty of the woman lies in the face. Let's ask every rishta auntie in the world. What does she look at in a girl? She will tell you, I will look at the face. Let's ask the cosmetic industry, how much is their facial cream and how much is their hand or foot cream? They will tell you facial cream is, facial cream, facial makeup, facial. Makeup is 99% the face. So the entire Western tradition is telling you that the essential, the real beauty of a woman lies in the face. So what purpose? Now, if you say the purpose of this is to conceal the beauty so that immodesty doesn't occur, unlawful physical attraction doesn't occur, lust doesn't occur, and you want to talk about akal, rational argument, right? How irrational, naudhu billah, how irrational would Quran al-Karim be that it's telling you to conceal the beauty in order to protect against all the things that happens when the opposite gender is attracted to beauty, but it tells you to leave what all humanity views to be the 90% of a woman's beauty, her face, completely revealed. How irrational would that be? Right? So here in niqab, I'm just going to present a rational argument. Second, that what makes sense? What is that zinat that could be showed to the uncle and could not be showed to another? Is it the hands? Is it the feet? Or do you think it's the face? What rationally makes sense? It would be the face. That, okay, I can show that to my uncle or my sons, or the whole list, right? Or is it some others? It could be even, strictly speaking, you could fill in the blank with some other aspect of beauty. Something to think about. All right? Food for thought. Now I will address the women directly, and I will just say this much, that obviously you have to progress. It takes time. I'm not, and no scholar is under the delusion that a woman, after one presentation, can necessarily start hijab, jilbab, and niqab in an instant, although it can happen, right? So you have to start by doing as much as you can. You should make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easier for you. Some of you may come from households or families, and this is maybe one of the greatest forms of Islamophobia, which is preventing daughters from doing hijab, let alone or you may have husbands like that. I've had cases like that as well, right? So these are issues. You need to look at that as well. I'm not denying those issues. I'm not denying your very real constraints circumstances. All I'm saying to you, and all of this for me was all about day one atheism, don't change what you know to be true. One thing is saying, I can't do it because my husband doesn't let me, my father doesn't let me. That's one thing. One thing is saying, I'd rather follow the opinion of this scholar on TV that it doesn't even exist in Islam. Don't compromise on your belief. Don't compromise on your ideology. Don't compromise on your knowledge of what you know to be true, even if maybe out of our own weakness in iman. All of us are weak. I don't do everything that I teach you or that I should do, right? Maybe out of your weakness in iman, you can't practice it. Maybe due to somebody else's weakness in their iman, they're making it difficult for you to practice it. But don't change your aqidah or your understanding of Quran or your knowledge of deen for this reason. This is why I told you forcefully, not because I'm trying to forcefully make you do it.
Quran is Quran, right? Yes, this is why I gave that whole topic of being religious in irreligious times. I understand that. Irreligious families, irreligious context, irreligious university environment, whatever you want to call it. But that doesn't change what the religion is. It doesn't change what the teaching is. It doesn't change what the Quran is. And the last thing I want to say about this is never let yourself be fooled that this hijab or jilbab or even niqab is some type of oppression on women. So to bring it back to today's topic, is some type of injustice to women. I once read a beautiful quote that said, Islam is telling a woman to cover her hair, not her mind. And this Darda, you can even say radiallahu ta'ala anha, she was from the Tabi'in, right? Zainab bint Kamal, or all those other, whatever, 100 women in the 8th century. Even they were teaching Ibn Hajar Asqalani hadith in niqab, or probably more likely behind a curtain or barrier, right? It did not limit their mind. It did not limit their intellectual achievement. It did not limit their scholarly accomplishment. It did not limit their regard in the eyes of the male scholars. So this is another myth. This is not an oppression. No doubt, yes, if somebody forces someone to do it, that can be looked at. But I also gave you an ishara, Nisa al-Mu'mineen, right? At least from the hijab jilbab level, right? But anyway, I mean, that it's difficult to do that as well. But the point is that these things are really core Quranic Islamic teachings. We should never let any other ideology come and twist it for us and suggest that this is a tool of oppression or gender injustice. It's just a piece of cloth. It's just a way of dress. And you will find a lot of interesting things written even by I can remember Arundhati Roy, who was a Hindu secular woman in India, but she spoke out in the defense of women being allowed to wear niqab when France and some of these European countries had a niqab ban. And she said, no, it's a woman's right to dress however she wants, and the niqab is not in any way an oppression of women. And I'm amazed that a secular Hindu woman has the guts and honesty to say that, and Muslim women are being deluded and buying into this ideology that no, this is somehow an oppression of women. All right? No doubt, beyond the physical haya, there's also emotional haya. Women who wear hijab, first they may also wear hijab very tightly and the rest of their clothes may be very tight and they may wear a lot of makeup and jewelry. So that is almost a self-defeating thing. And there are women who wear hijab who still talk and do things with, right? So dress isn't everything, right? But it's something. Just like the hidden beard, these are that these are not the be-all and end-all of deen. But just because they're not everything in deen doesn't take it out of deen either, right? And so then now, reassess all of the things I said when I was talking about working and studying, and I said that it's going to come, but I said it in accordance with the Islamic teachings of Haya and the teachings of Islamic dress. And now at the end I've explained the Islamic dress for women and an aspect of Haya. All right? And finally then, because anticipating a question that sometimes comes, that this is not fair, and what about men, and why are women to be blamed if a man casts lustful glances upon them, and why does a woman have to cover? So you're absolutely right in that sense. You will not be blamed if you cover for a man casting a lustful glance upon you. If you don't cover and a man casts a lustful glance on you, he will still be blamed. But you will also be blamed, because that Islamic teaching was that you were supposed to. Just the words are the simple. La yubdina zinatahunna. Tell them. Allah Ta'ala is saying in Quran to Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to tell them that they should not reveal their beauty. It's a very simple Arabic. The Arabic is as straightforward as the English I'm telling you. They should not reveal their beauty. Men are told also, this not this ayah, lower your gaze. Men are being told, do not gaze at their beauty. Women are being told, do not reveal your beauty. It's both sides, right? Responsibilities on both sides. Khair. All right. That is the end of today's session. And that is also the end of this 4-day series of lectures. There were a couple of things I've said to you in these 4 days that you can say are my own personal interpretation. I've done my best to highlight that to you whenever I did do that. There are many other students of Islam, scholars of Islam, teachers of Islam other than myself. I do not claim to be the final word, the sole arbiter, the sole spokesman for the vision of Islam. And all of you are welcome and free to take your scholarly understanding of Islam, interpretation of Quran, interpretation of Hadith from multiple people and agree with whomsoever you want. But I would ask you to try to take the major lessons that I also did try when I was covering them to highlight them, especially when it comes to the heart and the mind. And this is really the new battle of the 21st century. It's no longer about geography or territory or empire. The battle is now of the hearts and the minds. And if Muslims can learn to revive and restore the true Islamic feelings in their heart and the true Islamic knowledge in their mind, then this ummah will become successful. And the attack on the Muslims also now, the much more sophisticated attack, if you ask me, is to try to place in their heart the wrong feelings and to place in their mind the false knowledge. And finally, as I mentioned, it is a difficult time and you will struggle. And if you remember that slide I said, you must work on your faith, your iman, your actions, your amal. You must seek fellowship, association, companionship. Deen is not a go-it-alone process. You need friends, you need networks, you need multiple networks, diverse networks, not just one person, one group, one institute. And we need to gradually, slowly, but we're very late, and build up this sort of networking and then ultimately institutional strength. We may not be able to fix Islam at a civilizational level or a national level or societal level, but we have to work individuals and institutions and everything in between until we have enough critical mass of those institutions and collectivities that could potentially perhaps take it to the next level. Jazakumullah khair, jaza, especially those of you who were coming or listening all 4 days. That is both your himmat and your sabr and your husnizan for us. And we ask you to make dua for us that Allah Ta'ala make us according to your husnizan of us. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayk.